What does it take to dedicate your life to understanding and solving complex problems? Did you know that Africa is home to approximately 1/3 of the world's languages? So how can one individual have impact over organizations, investors, and entrepreneurs across the African continent? Through the story of our next guest, we will dive deep into these questions regarding doing business in Africa, its hunger for technology, and its resilience and adaptability to solving global problems. This is Molo Molo African Tech Story. So today, we are thrilled to have a very special guest, Dr. Deanne de Vries, a distinguished African advisor, an author, professor, and speaker whose life work is to fuel curiosity and growth across the African continent. Dr. de Vries brings over 30 years of global experience enriching the lives of those around her with knowledge, strategic advice, and an undying passion for Africa's potential. She's not only a best-selling author, but also a beacon of inspiration for countless individuals aspiring to make a tangible difference in the world. Welcome, Deanne, to Molo Molo African Tech Stories. We are really excited to have you. How are you?
Thank you. It's good to be here. What a gorgeous intro, man. Can I meet her?
Did I exactly? Can you meet that person? Who is that? But I'm really excited for this conversation, Dan. I know we've kind of, it's amazing that we've sort of been in the same circles but never
Mhm.
really met over the last
Yeah.
20 years in a way, which is crazy to think about it. That we know the same type of people
Yeah.
and yet we've never really connected, which is an amazing kind of, aha moment, right? To finally meet. Obviously, a couple of weeks ago, or at least based on Gilbert, which is someone I interviewed on this podcast. So
Yep.
those who haven't watched it, it's a really interesting podcast to watch and listen. But through Gilbert, we've kind of met, right, in
Mhm.
a way.
Yep.
And I got curious. I really did. I must be honest there. I was like, wait a minute. I feel like I know this person, but yet I don't know her. Like
Yep.
this is a weird feeling, and I'm really excited for this conversation because I do believe it's an important one, of course,
Mhm.
but also just really excited to hear from you and hear from your global experience, but also just the years and the courageousness of what you've been through in the African continent at large, right?
Yep.
So if I were to start,
Mhm.
then this is going to be a very interesting question for you because I think a lot of people who know you through many different lenses. But if I were to ask you, how would you describe who Dan is through the lens of a family member, like your brother, for example? What would you say?
I'm the firstborn, so I'm the big sister. Um, so my brothers would describe me as very curious,
Hmm.
adventurous, and a fabulous role model for their kids.
Wow, nice. So nice auntie, right?
Yeah. I'm a proud auntie. I have cool nieces and nephews.
Wow, and so you're a family of how many siblings?
Three kids. There's three of us. The three
Okay,
Ds.
and you're the
Deanne,
eldest.
Dennis, and Doug.
Oh wow, so you're the only, so you're the only daughter, am I correct?
Yes. Yep.
Oh
Firstborn, only
wow.
girl.
Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. And I mean, I've watched a couple of clips. I mean, you're all over the internet, so it's not like you are hidden.
No.
And from what I understand, you decided to go to Africa, or specifically make the decision to go when you were about 16, if am I correct? Or earlier than that?
So the initial idea was put in my head when I was around 6. And I was
Oh
listening to a
wow.
missionary at church that basically was talking about how there's a shortage of teachers in Africa. And so
Hmm.
children don't have an opportunity to go to school. And I was one of these kids. I loved schools and I loved libraries. And, at 6 years old, what is your favorite question? Why? Why aren't
Yeah.
there enough teachers? Why aren't there libraries? Why can't kids just go and get a book? And so I came home that night and with all the bravado of a 6-year-old was like, when I get older, I'm going to Africa and I'm going to teach because they need teachers. And I think everybody should learn how to read and everybody should have access to books. And then I
Wow.
kind of forgot about it because then you want to become a teacher. I wanted to be a professional soccer player, things
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
And then when I was it about 23, 24, I had an opportunity to go and work as a volunteer in Kenya with literacy training. And so I did. I quit my job on
Wow.
Wall Street, got on a plane, landed, walked off the plane in Nairobi, and immediately felt I'm at home. And yeah,
And the rest is history, as
the
they say,
rest is
right?
history. And all over the internet.
And all over the internet, of course. Wow, that's amazing. I mean, and your first trip to Africa, you said you are how old?
I was 20, what was I, 24?
Wow. And this was kind of the first time that you decided to go to Africa, and you did that while after quitting your job?
Yeah, so I quit my job on Wall Street and
Mm-hmm.
basically sold or gave everything away. Had 2 suitcases, except for my Dutch dishes. I sent those, and my mother took good care of those.
Wow.
But yeah, everything I owned was in 2 suitcases because I decided I just felt like that was the right thing to do. And so, yeah, then I moved to Nairobi and I was working as a volunteer, also working in what today is called, I mean, mind you, this was 30 plus years ago. In
Mm-hmm.
mentoring, I was working with women, um, literally micro and small business owners, everything
Mm-hmm.
from hairdressing to selling vegetables on the street corner, to help them grow their business, support their families. Through that, one of the women asked me if I could talk to her daughter, who got an opportunity to go to university in Nairobi, but was scared because she didn't know anybody who went to university. She was the first person in their family. And I said, if your daughter wants to talk to me, I'd love to. And so I went over to their house on a Saturday afternoon, and there were like 5 or 6 girls there. And all of them were the first ones in their family ever going to university. And so I just started sharing my story. And through that, we started meeting on a regular basis, like every month, throughout their time at university. And then when they were getting ready to graduate, it shifted to, okay, so how do I find a job? What is a
Yeah.
job? What do I want to do? That kind of idea. So yeah,
Oh,
from one
wow.
thing just kind of grew into the other. And so, yeah, I've never looked back.
Amazing. How was that first kind of time? I mean, were you a well-traveled I mean, I guess so you were obviously born, I'm assuming you were born in the Netherlands, right?
Actually, no, I was
Or
born in California.
oh wow, okay, there
Yeah,
you
yeah.
go.
My dad
Wow,
had
okay.
immigrated there because there was too much rain in the Netherlands, too cold. Met my mom, who also she was born in California, but both her parents were born here in the Netherlands.
Okay.
So I grew up speaking some Dutch, understanding Dutch, surrounded by that culture without even
Hmm.
I was 8 years old when I realized that I spoke 2 languages. Before that, I just thought whatever I said
Spoke.
was English, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, and then my parents both worked and they really sacrificed so that we could go to the Netherlands. Went 3 different times growing up to
Hmm.
meet our cousins. I've got 27 cousins here. And so yeah, good old African family. My dad's the
I was about to
firstborn of
say,
10.
wait a minute, wait. Stop the story. You have 27 cousins that you are aware of?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. And there's a few more in Canada, and then on my mom's side, I've got some in the U.S., mostly in California.
Wow.
My dad's
That
the
now
firstborn
that's
of
now that's
10.
African.
Oh
That's
yeah.
that's
See, I
that's
feel at
straight
home.
up
Yeah.
African lane for sure.
So
Wow,
yeah,
okay.
so I mean,
Hmm.
but for the rest, I'd never been to Africa.
Hmm.
And when I first came, it was just, everything is new. All of your senses, speaking, so it's hearing, it's smelling, it's seeing, it's tasting, everything was new. And I always call it like you go through the honeymoon phase. And there was one day where I was standing waiting to meet a friend, and it just dawned on me that I'd quit my job at Wall Street where I was earning more money than I could shake a stick at. And I was in Africa. I'd sold everything. I had no job. I didn't know how I was going to support, and I just freaked out. I turned around, walked back to my apartment, and I walked through the living room, and I guess my roommate said hello, and I didn't answer. So she said
Hmm.
hello again. I didn't answer. I just went and I sat on my bed, and she goes, "Are you okay? Did something happen?" And that's when it just kind of hit on me. Wait a second. I just flipped my entire world upside down.
Wow.
And it was terrifying. Um, and so, yeah, so you go through the phase and being like, okay, I think I've done the right thing, but holy cow, what did I do? Like,
Yeah.
and so, and knowing that it's not like today. There's no email, there's no phones. It's not like you can just call every day. You definitely can't WhatsApp or FaceTime.
Yeah.
And all I could do was like send a letter home every month or something.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, you're really very cut off. And then also just questioning, it's like I had an amazing career. I was working for one of the Netherlands' largest companies. They'd moved me to New York. I was
Hmm.
responsible for corporate communications. I had multi-million-dollar budgets. I took the company public on NASDAQ,
Wow.
merged 14 whatever so companies into their 6 divisions, helped divest one of the divisions, and now all of a sudden I just upped and left. And I was just like, uh-oh, now what am I going to do? So yeah, I went
Wow.
through a momentary, or I'm sure it was more than momentary, terror.
That's yeah, that's crazy to think about it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you in that moment of, I wouldn't say panic, but in that moment of realization that
Hmm.
my whole world is changed upside down,
Yeah.
what kept you saying, okay, you know what, let me just keep on walking through because I'm gonna stick with my decision and just kind of take one step forward after the next. What do you remember what it was? What really made you to just say, you know what, I know there are bad days and I know this culture is not mine and I'm learning everything. What made you kind of take one step after the other?
My gut. Like I said, I walked off the plane in Nairobi. I had never been there before, never been on the
Hmm.
continent of Africa before. And I was just like, I'm home. That's
Wow.
all I can explain. I'm home. And so it just felt right. My gut was like, it's okay. It's all going to work out. And yeah, but everything inside of me was just, you have, the common sense on one side that is just
Hmm.
like, that is the dumbest, foolish thing you have ever done. And you have family members that question your sanity, rightfully so.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm talking, this was 34 years ago. And then on the other hand, though, you also have your gut, and you're just, everything inside of you is like, no, this is where I belong. This is where I want to be. This is where I should be.
Mm.
And I think the other thing was, like I said, I was 8 years old when I realized that I spoke 2 languages. I didn't know that I grew up on 2 cultures until I was like around 8 years old. And when I started working, I was 22, and the board sent me to the United States. They had bought a number of pharmaceutical companies. The integration was not going well. And
Hmm.
so my boss's boss was on the board, and he came to see me and he says, "We want to send you to the States. Can you please go?" And I was 22. I'm like,
Yeah.
I was too naive to know what I did not know, but Meneer Hucha saw something in me, and so did my boss, Richard Koch.
Yeah.
And so, I walked into the boardroom in New Jersey and I'm like, "Hi, good morning." And they're just staring at me like, and I'm like, is my skirt like tucked up or something? Like, did I forget to put a shoe on? I'm like, "Is everything okay?" And they're like, "You have an American accent." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm American. Your name is
Yes.
Dutch." And I'm like, "Yeah, my dad is Dutch. You're American." And I'm like, "I'm American." And you could hear a sigh of relief in the
Yeah.
boardroom. Everybody was just like, "Oh, you're one of us." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And like I said, I was too young to know what I should and shouldn't do. So I just was like, "Were the Dutch that mean to you?" And then they just started saying a couple things and I started laughing. And I said, "You
Yeah.
guys do realize like that's the Dutch culture. They're very abrupt. They
That's
don't
true.
mean it bad at all." So literally within about an hour and a half, the all the issues got discussed. I'm like, "Well, you can do this, this, and this. Would that work? Would this work?" Literally in an hour and a half, we had everything resolved. And then I had the whole day, and they're like, "Should we take you to New York City?" I was like, "Yeah." I grew up in California. I'd never been to New York City. So, they drove me to New York City. We drove around the city. I went out to Wall Street. I can't even remember what all we did. And, took me to the airport, and
Yeah.
then I flew back. And so I met with Meneer Hughes, and I was like, here, these are the four issues.
Hmm.
These are what I think and what they agree would be welcome solutions. And, here's a potential timeline, blah, 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 blah. And so I was like, is that okay? And he was like, it's perfect. And it was like, that just also helped me see I love being the bridge between people. And so I
Okay.
love taking what I know, and sometimes when I don't even realize what I know, and sharing it with somebody else. And I think
Mm.
that that's also something like when I started helping and working with these women, I was I mean, I had a great opportunity. I got a fabulous undergraduate degree in international business, and I got a second degree in business management, and I minored in French and German because I'm a nerd and I love studying. And then I had all of these amazing experiences. I came from university, did an internship in the Netherlands, turned into a full-time job working for
Mm.
one of the Netherlands' largest companies. So, and I wasn't looking for these things. They just kind of came my way and I grabbed them and performed. And so as I shared this with these women, one of them then realized, like I shared, can you talk to my daughter? I'd never mentored a teenager before.
Yeah.
Um, but I love just being able to share what I knew. And so I think that that also gave me the impetus to want to stay in Africa. And I must say, one of the things I admire about literally everybody I've met on the continent is that they want to learn and they are excited to learn. And once they get to know you, and particularly I would say that also because my skin color is a little different. So I would learn,
Just a little.
in the different, like Kenya has a number of different dialects, like every country does. They all have
Yeah.
multiple languages. So I mean, I learned to say hello, how are you, what's your name? I mean, I could speak about five of the Kenyan languages. I had about 100 words vocabulary, and the others I could say maybe five or six. So that it was a way of what I called breaking the ice kind of vocabulary.
Sure. Yeah.
So once people get to know you and that you speak their language, oh my gosh, the questions start flowing and they're so eager to learn. And they will literally ask anything. And so that to me was also something that I love about just of course not everybody, but the majority of people in Africa, they really want to learn.
Mm.
They recognize, they acknowledge, they value learning. And I think some of that is cultural because, you learn from your elders. A lot of it's an oral tradition where you pass on proverbs, you pass on wisdom through generation to generation.
Yeah, and I think that's a very beautiful kind of way of summing up in general most Africans, because that's indeed true, right? I mean, I think it's not, I mean, I mean, I say we, I mean, I am African, but I do think there is a general statement to be made, which is Africans in general realize the scarcity of education,
Hmm.
right? Or
Hmm.
realize that education, by virtue that you are born in most African countries, is a scarcity.
Hmm.
And because of that, there is that sense of wanting or believing that the more I learn, the better life will get.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
fundamentally, this is a scarce resource that I'm collecting
Yeah.
within the context of where one lives, right? Because usually you live where you know your village, you know the situation there. It's usually um, quite backward,
Hmm.
lack of a better word, and education is kind of the stepping stones
Hmm.
that gets you really to elevate the very things that you love, which is, kind of your culture, your village, and your extended family. So I understand that, and it's obviously multi-complex. I mean, I'll try to summarize it, but it's that sense of someone
Yeah.
intently looking at you and saying, "Teach me."
Hmm.
It's he or she is thinking of all the things that he or she can do with that knowledge
Yeah.
to not just help themselves because of all the Ubuntu spirit that they're carrying. Each and every single one of us carries,
Yeah.
in a way, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, very, 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 very interesting that you've mentioned that. But I'm really intrigued, Diane, because your first trip was to Nairobi, Kenya. When did you actually kind of go back to see family after that? Is it, do you remember?
Um, Gosh, I was probably in Nairobi about 3.5, 4 years, and I went to the UK for my brother's wedding.
What? So for 3 to 4 years, you just
Oh yeah,
was
it's
immersed.
not a it's silly expensive to
Yeah, that's
travel.
true.
I mean, even these days, it's
That's
still
true.
expensive if I want to, if anybody wants to travel. It's like you can get deals going from Amsterdam to New York or
That's
Amsterdam to
true.
Spain, but Amsterdam to any place in Africa, there's never, or let me say rarely, because there probably is, but there's rarely a special flying from Amsterdam to even like Johannesburg or Lagos. So,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's another can of worms we can open, right? In terms of just air travel
yeah,
to Africa or air travel within African countries.
yeah.
Yeah, that we can get into it's a whole other topic which speaks to a lot of infrastructure issues and
Hmm.
specific organization misgivings.
Yeah.
But I really want to kind of move into the transition of given this fact and given what you've been able to kind of achieve from there onwards, and we'll get into kind of the details as we go along. If you were now to kind of pinpoint or peg on specific things that you can think about when it comes to what you saw and the innovation, right, that you saw in Africa, in the different regions that you've been, of course, Nairobi being one of them, Kenya specifically. What what do you think unique opportunities lie in Africa when it comes to entrepreneurship and investments that the innovation landscape within Africa can potentially give? Is there something that
Yeah.
you feel is really standing out for you?
Oh, yeah. So, as an outsider, when you land in Africa, there's a lot of things that are different. There's a lot of
Hmm.
things that, in an outsider's opinion, don't work or don't work like they should.
Hmm.
But it doesn't hinder anybody in Africa. And that was always and still is fascinating to me. There's this idea, I mean, how they look at something that an outsider would call a problem, to them, that's just life. And so, this idea, so they look at things from a completely different angle. They look at, and I'd say from two ways. One, they don't necessarily see something as a problem, they see it as an opportunity to be solved. Um, and I think because people are so flexible, whether it's transport, whether, like you said, how can I get more educated? Whether it's how can I make money? There's the formal way, which is what most, let's call it the West, US, Europe, or whatever, where you've got to register a company and get an employment contract. But in Africa, one of my favorite words in Kenya is jua kali, which literally means hot sun. And those are all the people that work, and they don't have contracts, but they work alongside the road. They make beautiful furniture. Whether you want a swing for your kids or a couch or a bed, it's stunning, ordered to made. Clothes. Who needs a department store? You get your own personal tailor. You go to the market, you buy your fabric, you come with a picture from a magazine, and tomorrow you got yourself a new outfit that nobody else has. So to them, they look at it so differently. And the other thing, specifically about technology, is so many of the technology solutions that I see coming from Africa are people that are solving something that they can see, like right in their neighborhood. Like there's this amazing young Tanzanian girl, she's 14 years old, had never coded anything, and saw that there were people in her village, in her city, that wanted to work as cleaners, and there were others that were looking for cleaners. And so she created an app and connected the two of them and won the Anzisha Prize a few years back for that.
Yeah.
There's multiple people that have designed apps for counterfeit medicines because unfortunately, a lot of those make it through to the pharmacy shelves in Africa. And so
Yeah.
now you can just open up the app on your phone, scan the little barcode, and it'll tell you if it's real or not.
Amazing.
So it's that, I read an article once that says we don't need unicorns in Africa, something along those lines. And it's so true. I mean, they're not looking to build the next TikTok or WhatsApp or Tesla or whatever. They're looking to solve everyday problems that honestly aren't just in Africa, but that's where the solutions. I mean, think of M-Pesa, right?
Yeah.
When people say, oh, yeah, mobile money, I love saying, where it was invented, right? 9 times out of 10, it's like, yeah, Apple Computer in the Silicon Valley. I'm like, yeah, no, wrong valley. It's the Savannah Valley. They're like, what? I'm like, it's Kenya. And I love
Correct.
telling that story because that's the truth.
Yeah.
Mobile
Yeah.
money, that's where it first started. And then it's gone global.
Yeah. I mean, I think thanks for kind of closing with that point, because for me, that's probably the unicorn
Hmm.
story of when it comes to technology that is ready-made for the structured chaos that is the African economy
Oh,
at large, of course. And
yeah.
M-Pesa and mobile money, now that everybody's piggybacking, whether it's MTN or Orange or
Hmm.
whoever's now doing mobile money, but it's within the context of an economy that you cannot really put a nice graph to say this is how it works, because
Yeah.
it works within a chaotic system
Yes.
that you just have to accept.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, like you said, don't
Description.
understand that. You think that it's a problem to solve. Like you need to solve, for example, a very good example where people who visit Africa from Western countries or developed countries would be like, yeah, but you need street names. And most Africans would tell you that's a waste of time.
Yep.
We
Agreed.
don't need street names.
Hmm.
I know exactly where I'm going, and the driver knows exactly where I need to go. That is good enough. What I need is better way of getting there. I don't need street names.
Yeah.
And and that again, so kind of those ready-made technologies that potentially, not potentially, M-Pesa is a very good point, right? That mobile money has moved out of the sphere of Africa and into different countries that are either developed or developing
Hmm.
as an alternative.
Yep.
To literally remove the need for a brick and mortar bank
Yep.
that now people exchange. And I remember when I was in Cameroon, for a couple of years ago. No, actually, no, not. I mean, I was there 2 years ago,
Hmm.
and I was just shocked. I mean, not shocked, but I was just surprised just how well this specific method works, where you don't need a smartphone. You just need a phone that has a screen,
Yep.
kind of the Nokia 3310 or the kind
Mhm.
of, really cheap phone. And the only thing you need is a number from the other number to say, hey, what's your code? And then they send you the money and you buy tomatoes, or you pay the driver, or you buy a whole fridge, or you buy a whole car.
Yep.
A
Yep.
whole car
Yes.
through mobile money. And it's just fascinating. So I think I understand what you mean by kind of the incredible technologies that are fitted based on the need that
Hmm.
are around them,
Yep.
around the people that are inventing them. So it's really exciting. In a way, it's exciting because you're solving an actual problem, right? It's not
Yep.
like you have to pitch to your VC, and you
Mm-mm.
you have to figure out, am I on Series A funding or Series B funding? No, if it's needed, people will buy from you.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah. But that's
Um,
also one of the mismatches is because a lot of your investors come in with that Western mindset of, okay, I need you to map out phase one, phase two, phase three. This will take 3 months, 6 months, and you're just like, it doesn't work that way here. And investors are just like, oh, then you must not be serious. I wonder about other people that have seen investments like M-Pesa or others go global and want to kick themselves like, why didn't we get in there earlier? But
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
people are just too fixated on it has to be done this way. And
yeah,
so it's one of the reasons why, I mean, I think it's sad because I think that technology in Africa could be doing so much more, but they do need access to capital. And unfortunately, there's too many of the investors that don't get it. The one good thing is that there are now more African based. So there's like fintech guys out of Nigeria that have made a lot of money and are turning around and investing.
Yeah.
There's a woman that I've met, a Rwandan refugee, who has set up a cool company called She Equity or Shequity, and she invests in women. And
Wow.
she gets it because she was born and raised on the continent, you know, and so she's become that bridge between European investors and the women in Africa that would benefit from a small investment. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's what you need, right? I mean, you need essentially because I think you're right in a sense that the the global structure when it comes to spending and getting money is not necessarily geared towards a very informal and less structured way of exchanging goods and money, right?
Yeah.
It's usually through the banks, and of course, that's one of the reasons why the banks have always been
Yeah.
critical of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency because it is a disruptor to kind of the status
Yeah.
quo. So is mobile money
Yeah.
to a large extent, and yet at the same time, which is crazy to think about it, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the mobile money frameworks, which obviously involves many parties now, I think churns out more money on a daily basis in terms of volume than most high profile banks in the world. It's the amount of exchange happening in terms of business in Africa through mobile money in developing countries outweighs kind of the single well-structured invoicing and
Hmm.
money sending through banks
Yep.
through wire transactions that
Yep.
that are happening on a daily basis, and yet of course people are still quite skeptical about
Yep.
investing because they just don't understand it, and I hear what you're saying for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and what's interesting is now as mobile money is gaining more prominence, what people have realized is that, okay, if you're somebody in a country in Africa, you may not have collateral. You may not own a home. You may not be able to go online and print out your bank statements for the last 3 years. But you know what you can do? You can print out, you can tap into what are your mobile money payments over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And people are starting to use that as collateral, as to say, listen, as you can see, I've never had a negative balance, or I've paid all of these bills, or you can pull out, you can do your entire business on your mobile phone, and you can prove that you've been paying your bills on time because your account's never gone in the red, etc. And so
Wow.
that's something that people are starting to explore about. Okay, how can we tap into that information and use
Hmm.
that as a sort of collateral so that you can get a loan without
Yeah,
having to own a home or, have your five
exactly.
years of bank statements from XYZ International Bank.
Yeah, and
So
I
yeah.
think that's amazing to think about that because essentially that is the framework that most Africans kind of have to live within, right?
Hmm.
Most Africans, if they do have a bank account, they hardly use it,
Yeah.
and they'll rather use kind of the mobile money framework that, in a way, speaks to the very to the nature of how things happen on a daily basis in African markets, which
Yeah.
is let's go, let's go, let's go. The best price, reduce the price, fight for the price, fight for your item,
Yeah.
and pay it quick, and then move forward to the next thing. Uh, Credit cards will never work in such a situation,
Hmm.
and potentially not even is not something that you want because you get charged anyway for that credit transaction. That
Yeah.
an African businessman will say, "Sorry, rather
Won't
give
do
me
it.
cash."
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Diane, I think this is really interesting. I think innovation is such a kind of a powerful force that, in my view, is definitely only at the tip of the iceberg, in my view, when it comes to Africa.
Hmm.
Now, if I were to kind of transition towards organizations and helping kind of organizations understand and navigate kind of African markets, and we've touched a little bit on that. But what are some, if I were to say, if you were to advise a company today that is foreign, that has hardly worked in an African market,
Hmm.
what are the kind of the top five, or what are the top things that in your mind they need to know when it comes to overcoming some of the challenges that they will face?
Yeah, great question. Only five, huh? No, you're right. You
Yeah,
want to keep
go
you
for
want
it
to
if
keep
you
it
have
down.
more.
Actually, there's three that I talk about, and I call it appetite, bandwidth, and capital. It's the ABCs of doing business. First
Correct.
of all, most people come into Africa, most companies, and be like, "I got money, I got a product or a service, I'm ready," and I'm like, "You're ready to fail." Because it starts with an appetite. And, you and I, we might have a different appetite. You might be like, oh, I'm really hungry for a steak tonight. And I'm like, you know what? Actually, I really love, I don't know, a salad, or I love ice cream, or, something. So you've got to know what your appetite is for Africa. And a lot of time that appetite is informed by misconceived perceptions. So there's a lot of risks that honestly, it's just a perceived risk. The risk of, oh, there's no talent in Africa, there's no money, nobody's gonna can afford my products, it's too dangerous. Um, it's everybody's corrupt. All of those things are perceived risks. They're not true. So you want to help people understand, what is your appetite? Are you willing to take on risk? Are you willing to actually get on a plane and go there? Are you willing to go live there?
Mm,
What are your expectations in terms of the return on your investment, et cetera? What are the deal breakers for you as a company? So it's helping them understand what is their appetite. And along with that, it's also, I work with C-suites, and the biggest challenge is that I had a situation in the company I worked where the CEO was like, go, 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 go. He was gung ho on Africa. The CFO, he only had one word about Africa: no. So you have a CEO that's going, go, go, go. And the other one's going like, no, no, no. That it's not going to last. I mean, it was
yeah.
great. I had some, was able to do some great things, but it's not going to last, because your C-suite has got to be aligned. So a part of appetite is making sure everybody has the same appetite. And then it's bandwidth. So great. You've got an appetite for Africa. You've got to get on the ground. I
Mm,
have to what? You have to get on the ground. I have to go there. It's like, yes, you do. you know. So, and one of my favorite, I have lots of favorite proverbs, but one of them is an Ethiopian, an Amharic one that says, "There's no better witnesses than your own eyes." So yeah, you've got to get on the ground. You've got to go there. And it's fun once people actually go. I remember two of my colleagues that came to Maputo, Mozambique, and they brought a suitcase full of food. One of them was like, I was expecting 1955. He goes, this is amazing. And I didn't know what 1955 was, but it definitely
I
was
was
not
about
a
to
compliment.
say.
Amazed. And one of them was a vegan and was also Muslim. And so had very limited food choices. So was terrified they wouldn't eat. He was amazed to find all the Indian restaurants that were owned and run by Muslims. And so everything was halal.
Mm,
And they were just like, whoa. And after that, believe me, anytime they needed to come to Mozambique, they got on a plane. They loved it. So it's helping people get the bandwidth to get data. So besides getting on the ground, the second challenge is data, and helping people
mm,
understand that oftentimes you've got to collect it yourself. How do you qualify or quantify, excuse me, a country that 60 to 80% is informal workforce? They're not found in your GDP. They're not found in a lot of statistics. So there's not a lot of consulting companies. And with all due respect to the big guys, desk studies don't work in Africa. They will only set you up for failure. So you've got to get on the ground. When I worked for logistics companies, I went to ports, and I sat at borders and counted how many trucks crossed and who they were from and where and license plates and all that stuff.
yeah.
And so but you also, well, that's a lot of an investment in time, energy, and money. The information that you get, nobody can take away from you. It absolutely gives you the first mover advantage. So, so when you have an appetite and you have a bandwidth, you've been on the ground, you've done your data collection, you've met people, you've understand who you can work with in local economy, then it's time for capital. And capital is not just your own day-to-day budget, but probably the one thing about capital that people are unfamiliar with in Africa is the need to invest in infrastructure. So when
Hmm.
I was building warehouse parks across the continent, that meant that oftentimes we had to pay to pull the electricity lines, the sewage, the water out to our facilities because we always built on, excuse me, on the outskirts of town near the main freeways that were going into town because that's where the easiest access point for trade was.
Yeah.
And people are just like, why do I have to do that? You know, that's just the cost of doing business. And what they don't realize is you make a whole lot of friends by doing that. The local governor is very grateful that
Mm.
you would invest in that, and is your biggest fan and loves to bring other investors over, investors that may need your warehouse. Yes, win-win. But the local communities, they start getting better internet service, and so they're excited to see you build. And you know what? They de-risk your investment because there's one, Mama Josephine was the main mama of the community near the one I was building in Mozambique, in Maputo. Mama Josephine knew everybody. I didn't need a guard because if somebody showed up around and they didn't belong there, Mama Josephine would call and be like, so and so, there's a strange man there. He's not supposed to be there. She would even go up and
Wow.
be like, you're not, so people don't stop to realize that in a way, yeah, absolutely. You're investing more than you would if you were building in Oklahoma, or if you were building in the Netherlands, or even if you were building in Dubai. Okay.
Mm.
But there's a lot of upside to that. You de-risk your investment. You get to know the community. You get to know the government, and in a very ethical manner. And so yeah. So for me, I always help people with ABC: appetite, bandwidth, and capital, and frame it around that so that
Yeah.
that's easy to
Yeah.
remember.
No, amazing. I think this is essentially what, and I forgot to mention, of course, that is essentially what you speak about in your book, right?
Mm.
Which is really exciting. I mean, I've started reading, just by the way. I've got a Kindle version. I haven't gone through it, and I might have to have you back on the show so we can answer some of the questions. But I do think, yeah, thanks, Diane. I mean, that is essentially, it can only come from someone who has lived and who has outlived some of the pain points of most African countries, because there is kind of a hump you have to get over. And
Mm.
and a lot of this got to do with yourself, your own perception of what altogether means,
Yeah.
and your perception of, what comfortable means. And that hump is not, oh no, I'm sacrificing my own
Mm-mm.
comfort for the sake of making money, but like you say, you are now realizing a completely different world once you get over that hump, that is a lot more beautiful than your
Mm-hmm.
own perceived kind
Yeah.
of, gated
Yeah.
view of the world. And that for me is the key to what you're saying, right? Is that
Yeah.
once you get over that appetite, that bandwidth, and the realization of that capital is not just about spending money, but who you're spending money on,
Yeah.
is just incredible. And it's, I mean, I'm African,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
My parents are proud African. I grew up in a very proud home. And the one thing that my dad always tells me, or one of the stories that he always keeps banging on in my head, is just being proud of where I come from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Proud of just, yeah, you're not, I don't know, a rich kind of, Manhattan type, you know,
Mm-mm.
family son, in terms of growing
Yeah.
up in a very affluent and opulent, but yet you have what a lot of people crave, which
Mm-hmm.
is purity of the land, purity of having things that are still raw and fresh. and
Yeah.
and I think that's probably one of the biggest things when I go back home, is that to just, the air that you
Yeah.
breathe is like, yes, I am home.
Yeah.
This is pure, and the upside is almost infinite because the potential is humongous
Yeah.
when you think about it in that perspective.
Yeah.
No,
And
thanks, Diane. I think this is, I guess, something that a lot of people are scared of, kind of getting over that hump, right? They
well,
they
and
only get the Western media in a way.
Yeah, and it's because we're comfortable with where we're at. We're comfortable with things that we know. You know, you can
Hmm.
build a warehouse park in the Netherlands, in the United States, in Dubai, and it's all structured, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? There's a lot of people that are super happy in that, and that's awesome. I'm not. I need to be creative. And that's one of the things that I love about Africa is that creativity, is that you're creating something that doesn't exist. When we had to, when we would need to get paper stamped or whatever, we would go in person and,
Hmm.
whip out the phone and say, hey, here's what it looks like, and you'd have to explain to people, what is a warehouse park? Why do I need a warehouse? Why do, but you're creating something that doesn't exist. And that is what inspires me. And you know what? There's enough. I mean, I look around me here in Amsterdam, and there's office buildings, and there's lots of bankers and investors. And you know what? Y'all can keep your spreadsheets. Um, so to be successful in Africa is to me not so much a question of what you're earning, your money, but it's also just who you become as a person.
Hmm.
And I'm happy working there. I'm happy creating something new. I'm happy making a road, a pathway that hasn't been there before. And yeah, you fall down and then you get back up. You make mistakes and you're like, whoops, sorry. And you just apologize and smile. And then it's people forgive you. That's the other thing that Africans are so nice. They
Exactly.
forgive you.
That's true.
So,
Yeah, I mean it's quite important for everybody in general who doesn't really know a lot about Africa to understand is that the quickest way to diffuse a situation is just saying sorry.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I've found very I'm actually struggling to find specific incidents where me being quick to just diffuse by saying sorry resulted in the person still wanting to be kind of aggressive and whatever. Because in general, like you're saying, people do crave connection. They crave kind of good laugh,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's the African culture. You crave a good laugh, and
yeah,
you crave a good meal, and you crave a good, dance, and and enemies who were shouting at each other all of a sudden become friends over
yeah,
a glass of wine or a good meal. And that's essentially the hump that you get over, and you realize this beauty where people are genuinely looking to be happy
yeah.
within the circumstances that they're in, irrespective of
Hmm.
their background. Now, having said that, we talk about meal, and I thought we should take a bit of an interlude and a bit of an interval, and I wanted us to discuss on your favorite dish, your favorite African dish,
You're gonna make me
right?
choose, or
And
people are gonna hate me if I choose just one.
oh, okay. So let's just talk about your top three
Okay.
African dishes
Mm.
and why you love them, and and kind of
Okay.
give me your version of how that's being made or prepared,
Okay.
if you can. Yeah.
Okay, so dishes. Okay, so uh I would say and this is found in it's called something different in each country. Ugali, fufu, pop. And what I love about it is the first time I saw it, it's basically cornmeal, maize meal, flour, whatever, that's been put in hot water, stirred until it's fairly firm, and then put upside down on a plate. So the first time I saw it, I thought it was a cake because I'm like, what's a cake? And then they slice it in the way you would a cake, and then I found out later they did this only because I was white. They actually served it like with a knife and put it on my plate. Normally, you just stick your hand in and you look for
That's
a
right.
mango
That's right.
So, so I'm expecting something like cake. And I'm like, this is so not cake. But I fell in love with it. So everywhere I go, people are shocked because they'll order rice or potatoes. I'm like, yeah, no, I want ugali. They're like, what? And then I eat it with my hands. I mean, you got to eat it with your hands.
Correct.
Um, so yeah, that would be one.
Okay.
Um,
Nice.
Another one would be again something that you find in a lot of different countries. The chapati. So the
Chapati. Hmm.
chapatis are the round. I first was introduced to them in Kenya. It was also came in through the Indian influence, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they would have chapati and they would have it with dengu, which is what they would eat it a lot
Mm.
with in Kenya, which is like a small green lentil, or
Mm-hmm.
they would eat it in in Uganda. They might eat it with the beans. In Egypt, they would definitely eat it with the beans there. So different countries there, they would eat it with a stew, and of course in South Africa they would eat it with the braai with the meats. Love that. Um, the third one would be my favorite meal in Mozambique. It's very simple. Um, Go to your favorite just seaside restaurant, plastic chairs, plastic plates. You don't need to go to the fancy restaurants for this. And you just order a camarão grelado, which is a
Oh,
grilled prawn. And these are like, I grew up with these pink shrimps that were like this and were disgusting. So the first time I went, I'm like, yeah, no, I don't like shrimp. And everyone was like, just trust us. So this prawn, and it was a season of the king and the queen prawns.
oh,
I mean, they were huge. And they literally were just caught out of the sea, cleaned them, cut them in half, a little bit of garlic and lemon juice on the grill on my plate. Yeah.
heaven.
Yeah. And then that tastes really good. They usually put it with like the French fries, which again are all fresh. Because I mean all the fruits and vegetables are fresh in Africa. I mean that's not a dish, that's like a category.
That's
Um,
true.
so
That's
yeah, they
true.
all taste so much better there because they're literally fresh. And then you get that with a really cold Dos Emis, which is their
Oh,
local beer, the two M's.
yeah.
Yeah, then you
Come
died. Then I died and
on.
gone to heaven. Yeah.
Come on. Yeah, I mean
You're
that's
making me hungry.
I know. I'm thinking, what are you do what am I doing? What am I doing? I mean the last one I mean I remember going to Mozambique and that's one thing we
Mhm.
tried. I mean, I'm not always a fan of kind of street food, especially when it comes to fish.
Yeah.
But then he said, "No, don't worry. It's just
Yeah.
sit
Yeah.
down and see."
Yeah.
And I was, oh my word, I was like, "What is this? This is serious.
Yeah.
This is
Oh, yeah. No, no.
amazing."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I mean, in general, and this is, I don't know if you've experienced this, and I tell my wife, and she, I mean, of course, she's South African, and in a way, street food is a thing, but not a really big thing in South Africa, to be
Hmm.
honest, compared to other African countries. And she couldn't believe that, especially in Cameroon, of course, I mean, you have to kind of figure out a minimal criteria,
Yeah.
but as long as that person meets that minimal criteria of a street vendor,
Hmm.
most
Oh,
street
yeah.
food is
Mm.
amazing. And it's like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And the circumstance for that person to be able to provide that food, when you really think about it, you're
Yeah.
thinking every day must be
Oh,
a
yeah.
miracle for you to be able to really reach this point of providing this high quality food
Oh, yeah.
consistently. Um,
Sorry, you just remind me of a story I have to tell. So the
yeah.
chapati, the
Hmm.
like the round, like what other countries might call it, a flour tortilla or whatever. I I'd walked across the border from South Sudan into Uganda. Thought I could do it, couldn't. Hitched a ride on a bus because I speak
Wow.
Swahili and it was a Kenyan bus. So they thought it was so cute that this white chick could not only speak Swahili, but then could speak Kikuyu. So I was front row seat next to the driver. And I get off with my colleague and I see this guy making what they call in Uganda a Rolex. I'm like, oh, I said, Rabia, we have to eat a Rolex. And he goes, from the food vendor, like the street vendor? Like, us. And I'm like, I don't know. So I asked our driver, I'm like, John, you want one? He goes, oh, yeah, yeah. So I'm like, give me 3 Rolex. And again, they just fry the eggs and the onions. And so it's like scrambled eggs and with some fried onions and whatever. Roll it. It is just you can't describe that taste. And so he's a foodie and he's also a chef. So he saw us eating it and he was like, you trust it? I said, I trust it. So he tried it and he was like, this is amazing. Like, so yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. You have to know where to get it, but oh, and then you got to eat it hot.
And
Don't
once
take
you
it.
do, you can't stop, right? I think you're like,
Yeah.
man, I know this guy. I'm gonna go to my
Oh,
guy
yeah.
to get my
Yeah.
regular.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, really nice interlude. I am incredibly hungry now, and I miss the African vibes when it comes to street food.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's incredibly diverse, and I think a lot of people just don't understand. I mean, I'm Cameroonian, and of course, I know quite a few African countries. You
Hmm.
probably know way more than me. But the incredible thing about it is that Africa is incredibly diverse,
Oh, yeah.
just ridiculously diverse. And especially when it comes to food,
Yeah.
that you can literally eat almost an African dish every day for a whole year without potentially eating the same dish
Yeah.
twice. So we have to kind of move on to different questions. And I wanted us to kind of talk about in terms of challenges, and we obviously we looked at from the viewpoint of an organization and what they
Hmm.
need to overcome.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say is when it comes to the global business, and of course, maybe I'm speaking to the professor in you now, and when it comes to, international development and
Hmm.
kind of the globalization of what real business means,
Yeah.
how would you incorporate kind of real world experiences in Africa when it comes to preparing students and African students in general, right, for
Yeah.
global challenges? So not the other way around, i.e., saying if you're an African
Yeah.
and you've been taught this mindset regarding business and regarding kind of international development, what are
Hmm.
some of the things that you will need to prepare such a person when it comes to facing global challenges?
Yeah. Well, first thing that I always talk about is your mindset. And we need a mindset that's curious. I think too often our mindset is um, what I would call a single story mindset.
Hmm.
And there's an amazing Nigerian author, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who also did a TED talk called The Danger of a Single Story, which is basically the story that we've been told about Africa. And that
Hmm.
both for people in Africa that have been basically brainwashed, for lack of a better word, to be like,
Hmm.
yeah, no, no, y'all don't have anything. You're not going to accomplish much. You need donors, you need aid, to
Hmm.
people who are in the West and think like, oh yeah, I'm the savior. I'm going to save Africa. And with all due respect, I mean, they raised a lot of money with "We Are the World" and "Do They Know It's Christmas," but that was in the 1980s. And
Hmm.
thankfully, I look a lot better now than I did in the 1980s. I've changed, thankfully. Um,
Yeah.
and so has Africa. And people are like, wait, what? And so for me, I'm a storyteller and I love pictures. And so in my offices, I always have, like, you see art behind me. I also have pictures hanging on my walls, and people are like, "Where's that?" They're like, "Oh, is that Dubai?" I'm like, "Yeah, no, that's wherever it is in Africa, or that's Luanda, or that's Maputo, or that's the border with Zambia and DRC." And people are like, "What?" I mean, they don't understand. That just shocks them, and that's what I want. Not to shock them in a bad way, but to kind of wake them up and be like, "Oh," because they just haven't had an opportunity. And when you can open people's eyes, then you awaken that curiosity. And immediately the next time they hear something about Africa, they'll go back to what they heard from you. Even if they don't remember, they'll just have this, oh, you know what? It's better than I thought, you know?
Hmm.
And so that's really what I want to do. I want to encourage people. I always tell my students is that different is not wrong. Different is
Yeah.
not bad. Different is simply different. And so if we can awaken that curiosity to not just assume everything at face value, not to believe every tweet or every article headline. I mean, Africa is 54 countries. Um, I had a book when I worked in Kuwait. I had a children's book on my desk called Africa's Not a Country. Because in the Arabic culture, um, again, it's similar to Africa. You respect your elders. And again, there too, I was an outsider. So they would come in and my Kuwaiti colleagues would pick up the book. They're like, Africa's not a country? I said, no, it's 54. Hey, Miss Deanne, 54. I said, yeah, shall I show you? And then, you can open the book and it's a children's book. So it's completely non-threatening or anything like that. And they're just like, oh, wow. And so, yeah, if you can awaken people's curiosity,
Hmm.
then not only what you tell them can resonate, but everything they read going forward will also they'll look at it through a different perspective, through a different lens.
Yeah. 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 No, that's I think you've said it very beautifully, is that, it's gotta be built around kind of linking to the A of your ABC, which is the appetite, right?
Hmm.
And for you, and that was going to be, in a way, an additional question, but you just answered it, is that for you to build that appetite, where you gotta build curiosity, right? For you to
Hmm.
be able to kind of salivate over a meal, it's gotta oftentimes either smell good or look good,
Yeah.
or something's gotta
Yeah.
really intrigue you. And I think what you mentioned there is curiosity, is kind of, smashing the status quo, or the preconceived ideas
Yeah.
that people have about Africa. And
Yeah.
it still surprises me today, just how many misconceptions people
Yeah.
have about the state of Africa,
Mm.
the kind of where it's at.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, don't get me wrong, you still have a lot of conflict. You still
Hmm.
have a lot of poverty, and people living under the kind of the poverty line, and
Hmm.
structural issues. But at the same time, there is incredible progress
Hmm. Yeah.
that, unfortunately, those specific isolated, in a way, events
Yeah.
kind of mask over the overall progress, and kind of move that Africa has made,
Yeah.
and in a way, to some extent, surpassed a lot of other countries that were deemed first world,
Yeah.
to a large extent. I think that's quite important, and thank you so much for kind of keeping that work of instilling curiosity, and really being an advocate for the African continent,
Yeah.
and people investing in Africa, because that's exactly what Africa needs.
Yeah. Well, and you're
Um,
seeing it more and more also in the creative industries. Like
mhm.
that's one of the reasons I have art on my whole back wall, depending on what angle I want. I have all my African art because people are like, where's that from? It's a conversation starter. I mean, think about the Grammys. The Grammys now have an African Music Award. Hello, huge. Think about Netflix, the documentaries and the movies that they're doing. There's even an animated one called Super 4, and I was able
Yeah,
to meet
that's right.
the woman who was the main person, who was the originator of the idea and the main animator. And she worked with, I believe it was 8 different countries, and that entire thing was created in Africa on the continent. So they worked
Amazing.
with people, animators that did the animation in different countries across the continent. They worked with a studio in Cape Town to put it together. So there's more and more that's coming. There's more and more movies that are coming. Look at sports. Okay. NBA has been all over Africa for years. And for any Americans that are listening, the National Football League now, for 2 years running, has also been doing summer camps. And the first year they did their summer camp in Ghana, 4 Ghanaians got full scholarships to American universities to play American football. And people are like, but they've never played before. No, but they can kick. And in American football, that's what they need. If you can
That's
kick,
what you
then you
need.
then you can kick that field goal and make 3 points. They're like, we want you. And so, but you see that with but you see that with other sports that are coming as
Yeah.
well. And obviously, there's all of the runners. There's Tunisia, who has the amazing woman who went so far to Wimbledon. And her nickname is what? The Minister of Happiness, because she was always smiling. Which
Yeah.
I'm just like, yeah, but that's most Africans. Surprise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so that
No,
that creative vibe is, yeah, and fashion, and oh yeah, love it.
yeah. I mean, to be honest, we can, and I think once people realize just how much influence Africans have on pop culture,
Hmm.
politics,
Yeah.
um, I mean, just general reforms, and but also kind of going back to the values, because I think that's also something that people forget, is that
Yeah.
that one of the biggest potential when it comes to Africa is that there's still a very high respect for certain values,
Yeah.
specifically around family, and specifically around kind of community service
Hmm.
and community upkeep,
Yeah.
that a lot of first world countries almost leave it up to the government to do, and say, hey, it's not my
Hmm.
problem. The government, I'll pay my tax. They need to sort it out. And yet in Africa, it's the other way around, which in a way, the human capital is a lot
Yeah.
more purer, in a
Yeah.
sense. when it comes to such
Yeah.
endeavors, which in my view is the only way humanity can really move forward, is if
Yeah.
everybody kind of helps each other, right?
Yeah. I mean, it goes back
Um,
to that idea of community,
yeah,
or Ubuntu in Zulu or
yeah,
Ujamaa in Swahili. Yeah, it's about we. Whereas the
yeah,
Western world is like me, 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 me. It's my money. I earned it. It's mine. In Africa, it's like it's ours. What can I do to benefit my community? And that isn't just your brothers and sisters, but that is literally your community, your village, your city. Yeah, your
yeah.
country.
And to be honest, now from a personal perspective, before I want to ask you another question, is that I've always, for a large part of my working life, and until maybe the last 5, 10 years, I've always seen, and I'm sure you've heard of the term black tax
Hmm.
being quite a negative thing, where it's like, oh, I have to do this again. Oh, no, okay, my mom is asking, and my cousin is asking, and
Yeah.
this and that. And it can be a nuisance, and a lot of working professionals who are African,
Hmm.
maybe working overseas or working in a really nice firm in one of the African
Yeah.
mega cities may see this as a burden. But when you really think about it,
Hmm.
you realize it's a privilege
Hmm.
because you are essentially be deemed someone who comes from the same environment, who
Hmm.
looks like this person that is asking you for some help, and you have the choice of uplifting someone from 0 to 1, which is 100%,
Yeah.
and from 1 to 2, which is another 100%,
Yeah.
and that doesn't come often
Yeah.
because essentially you are given the power to essentially help a medical bill go away for someone
Hmm.
that you wouldn't even fathom doing that for a counterpart in Europe because the medical bill is completely out of your
Yeah.
reach to help.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about the power dynamics, for me at least, just makes me almost realize that I am in a privileged position
Hmm.
to be able to help, and I just need to have the right mindset regarding community service. And
Yeah.
I think that's very important what you've mentioned. Okay, so I I I wanna bring up a specific topic which I think we haven't touched on, which is you've interviewed some African heads of states. Is that, as far as I understand,
Yeah.
that's correct? And I haven't
Yes.
found any specific video or snippet on the World Wide Web that kind of speaks specifically to this fact. And I wanted to speak about leadership a little bit, and
Hmm.
and and specifically when it comes to leadership in business, but leadership in general.
Hmm.
And what are some essentials that, in your mind, is required to succeed within either political or the business environment within
Hmm.
Africa? What would you say?
I'm going to start with my favorite C, which is curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, you never stop learning. And I think it doesn't matter where you lead, it's having that humility to never stop learning. Um, and whether that's in formal setting because you're getting degrees or informal settings. It was interesting when I interviewed the heads of state. There were a number of them that talked about that mentioned that actually, and two of them specifically mentioned how they would invite experts into the cabinet and at the cabinet meetings. And at the beginning, people were just like, "Why?"
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, and then as they told me, I was like, wow. I mean, imagine the day you become president, you are supposed to be a subject matter expert on everything from healthcare, economics, trade, how to negotiate trade agreements. What does it mean to have an oil and gas concession? How are you supposed to pay back your loans? How do you take your little insy binsy weensy weensy budget and use it to build hospitals, build schools, pay teacher salaries, improve roads? And I'm like, holy cow. I mean, when you and I get jobs, if there's
Yeah,
something we don't know in our job, we get on the job training. We can go to a course. I mean, how many LinkedIn courses are there these days and all these other
yeah,
online things? There are no online courses about how to become a president of a country. And so, yeah, it's that curiosity and that humility to always be open to learning.
Mhm.
And I'd say the other thing is that aspect of it's a we're doing this together. So you want to be aware of, like, I have no problem telling people what I'm not good at. I am not techie. I cannot do tech for the life of me. I can do finance, but if I can hire somebody to do it, I am hiring somebody to do the spreadsheets. Okay. I can do it, but it's going to take me 3 times longer than them.
Yeah.
And people, I'm had a boss who kept saying, don't tell people you don't know finance. And I'm like, why? I'm not ashamed of it. I know it. I can do it. I've done budgets. And I do budgets better than our finance guys, but it just takes me 4 times longer.
Yeah.
Why not use that time to do something I'm good at?
Yeah.
Whether that's mentoring people, whether that's putting strategies together, whether it's making sure strategies get executed, which most people don't like to do.
Mhm.
So yeah, so it's always being open, curious, and open to learning. And secondly, being aware of the we around you, which is who are the people you want to bring onto your team that know things that you don't know? Because then you know what? Y'all are going to be a lot better. Um, and I would say the other reason the we is important is that um, you want to help everybody grow because you're only as good as your weakest link. And people think, oh, a weak link is bad. No. If you ask me what part of my body I could cut off, there ain't nothing you can cut off. Okay. My pinky, my little toe. No, I want it all. And so a weak link is not necessarily equivalent to bad.
Yeah.
Every person has a role to play. I need a janitor to clean the office. I need a plumber if my toilet is backed up. That plumber is super valuable, much more
Mhm.
valuable than a CFO if my toilet is backed up, you know? And
True.
so, yeah, having that we, and so that everybody together rises and everybody together benefits.
Yeah, that's indeed something that oftentimes we, at least for me, being kind of part of a very high performance team, leadership is often seen as the smartest person in the room should lead. And based on what you say, it's actually not the case. It's actually the person who recognizes the quickest that he needs someone else to help him should lead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because naturally a leader, based on what you say, needs to be very acutely aware of the complexities of his or her role.
Yeah.
And by that virtue, that complexity cannot be done by one person,
Mm-mm.
and it's got to be done with multiple people. And I think it's good that you've mentioned that because I actually never thought about that. I'm like, man, it's tough being an African president. I mean,
You couldn't pay me to do that job. There's not enough
man,
money in the world to want to do that job.
that is tough. And I think of it from a even beyond kind of the obvious, right? Where okay, it's the economics
Yeah.
and kind of infrastructure issues. I think of all the tribal things you have to be aware of as well, right? Where it's not just
Mm-hmm.
along political parties, also along tribal lines
Yeah.
and how people take, kingship so seriously
Yeah.
and traditions within parliament is not just kind of
Yeah.
westernized, but also Africanized.
Yeah.
And as an African president, you got to be aware of all these things,
Mm-hmm.
even when it's not even yours
Yeah.
culture to promote.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Now that I think about it,
Yeah.
I'm like, what? It's
No,
crazy.
I mean, and it was fascinating to literally, I mean, I describe it as I sat at the feet of these individuals. And now they were not all good. I mean, some of them definitely hurt their countries. Some of them, it'll take 2 generations probably, if ever, to get their
Mm,
country out of it. Others were, I describe a head of state as good because they left their country in a better place than when they found it.
hmm.
And to me, that's a good head of state. You can't look at GDP because most of Africa is informal. Plus, I don't even think GDP gives you the right indicators in the so-called Western world.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's just a very subjective. So for me, it was if you've left your country in a better place than
Mm,
when you first became head of state, then to me, but I wasn't. It wasn't so much about I wanted to be who was good and bad. It's just to understand their thinking. um, why they wanted to do it, how they became, how do they describe political leadership? Do they think they're doing a good job or did a good job? Do they think their peers are doing or did a good job? Why do so many people think that every African president is corrupt except Nelson Mandela? And so, and but beyond that, it opened my eyes to so much, not just about political leadership, but like you said, just to leadership in general,
Yeah.
about how you've got to be very clear. You know, this is your one focus, these are your objectives, and the goal is progress.
Hmm.
Because in 4 years or 5 years, depending on your term, you cannot meet all of it, but can you progress to it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And to do that, you need to pool in the best people. But you know what? Some of these guys I met didn't. They just pulled in their buddies, whether it was a drug lord or everybody from their same tribe. And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they did damage.
And it is tough. I mean, leadership in general, within a perfect kind of framework, is tough on its own because it's a people populated function
Mm-hmm.
that you have to deal with, right? You deal with, I mean, you're a leader of people, not leader of kind of mechanical machines
Yeah.
that can automate, but
Yeah.
it's people.
Yeah.
And now put that within the context of a informal and chaotic and previously disjointed and infighting, and you as a political leader somehow need to figure out how to move forward the
Mm-hmm.
whole country.
Yeah.
Man, that is, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, one would, and it's funny, and I say it very loosely, but I think I'm also speaking to kind of my peers here because oftentimes we are so quick to judge
Mm-hmm.
an African leader,
Yeah.
but we are not quick to also recognize the problems and the solution that are required to fix them, and
Yeah.
the fact that you are not the one, it's him. Of course, okay, you can say X, Y, and Z, and he's done this and da da da, but do you have context of the alternative?
Yeah.
Do you have even context of what could have been worse? Potentially, this is his best, given what he knew, given what could have come afterwards, given a potential coup d'état, given X, Y, and Z,
Mm. Yeah.
and not realizing you don't know the full story.
Yeah.
And yes, history will judge some leaders to be incredibly bad and short-sighted and so forth, but history will never tell you what was the alternative to
Mm-hmm.
that decision. It could have been worse.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah.
And that helped me to a bit sensitize a bit my
Yeah.
kind of judgmental quick fire. Yeah, he needs to go. He needs to go. He's been here 40 years. This one's been like this and that.
Yeah.
But do I know the alternative? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know the alternative. The alternative could have been civil war
Yeah.
for 40
Yeah.
years. Maybe he was it,
Yeah.
and he saw something, or him and his peers, or whatever the case may be. He saw, I don't know. I cannot judge, right?
Mm-hmm.
All I can say is I'm well aware that I don't know the full story.
Yes.
History has taught me that what I see is not all that it is.
Yeah.
And I think that is something just to kind of keep in mind. I think for a lot of us, because I mean, some presidents, we look at them, we're like, yeah, all bad, they must
Yeah.
go, blah blah blah, but you actually don't know the full story. And I think what you're
Mm-hmm.
saying is true, right? Is that you kind of have to sit at their feet and just listen
Yeah.
to the complexities that they are telling you, and all of a sudden you realize, oh my word,
I don't want that job.
I don't want that job. So I think we are getting close to kind of the end.
Mm-hmm.
This has been amazing. Dan, this has been really, really, really gold nuggets. I've enjoyed it
So
so
hard.
much.
So
You've
hard.
given me African proverbs, you've given us African dishes, you've given us, kind of amazing stories throughout the different questions that we've gone through. But I wanted us to kind of finish off specifically on what drives you. I mean, in a way, it's it's sad for me to say this because it's often true. Oftentimes, and I think it's got a lot to do with kind of us as Africans caring a lot for the continent, that we are oftentimes our worst critic to
Mm-hmm.
the point where inaction is the preferred
Mm-hmm.
kind of way of
Yeah.
moving forward. I.e., you see so many problems and you say, you know what, I'm not gonna do anything about it
Yeah.
because I am overwhelmed by other people not doing it, and if he's not doing it, I'm not doing it. And it's often quite sad to have other people from outside, like you say, kind of feeling that they can fix the African continent
Mhm.
on Africans' behalf.
Yeah.
That will be the long-term solution, and we've often seen that that is not the case. But when it comes to you and your passion for promoting Africa,
Mm-hmm.
what drives you, but also what has helped you to maintain this level of enthusiasm and commitment, especially given the complexity that you've seen, right? I mean, you've seen probably way more than I've seen. What would you say are some of the things that has helped you to keep on going
Yeah.
and of course to maintain that path?
Yeah. So I'm gonna first make a comment when you said about how oftentimes Africans just sit back and wait to receive. I
Mm-hmm.
think that that also comes because that's what they've been conditioned to do.
Mm,
They've been oppressed. Um, People from outside came in, did literally almost nothing to get to know the culture, the people, their ways of living that were as advanced. The richest man that ever lived in the world was from Africa, Mansa Musa.
yep.
And so these outsiders came in and basically just said, "Y'all are stupid, you're dumb, and you don't know anything." And so there's a book I read that described it very nicely as Africans have the two souls. You have that soul of who you are and your history, and the amazingness. I mean, jazz, mathematics, geometry, poetry, coffee. I mean, so many things came from Africa. We would not have today's music industry, today's art, if it wasn't for Africans. But
Mm-hmm.
the Africans have been conditioned, have been told time and time again, history is written by the victors. History was not written by the Africans. Africans' history was written by foreigners. I mean, hello, they chopped up Africa in Berlin in the 1800s. There
Yep.
wasn't even an African in the room. Okay, shame on
Yep.
them. So I think one of the reasons that I'm excited about it is because I see that potential, and I know that I see it because of the opportunities I had growing up. Um, but I also think that I tend to be an optimist. I embrace complexity. It doesn't scare me. Complexity to me equals creativity. I, you know, yeah, so that's the best way I could say is I embrace it. I mean, I grew up with a grandfather that said the day you stop learning is the day you die. And so I was very fortunate to grow up in a home where we always had books and magazines.
Mm,
Most Saturdays we'd go to the library. And so I was able to, through reading, you learn things, you store things back here in your brain that later on are going to come up. And so I'm grateful that I also at one point had this passion, this desire to go to Africa, and I was able to act on it. Like, that's
mm,
also pretty amazing. So I'd say what keeps me going is realizing that there's enough in this world for everybody. Um, Anne Frank is a very famous 13-year-old young Dutch Jewish girl who left a diary, had to hide for months and years on end because of her faith.
mm,
And, one of the quotes that I love about her, that I love that she wrote is that she goes, God created enough for everybody. Why can't we share? And that's kind of, framed my thinking as well. And she talks about human greatness. It doesn't depend on your wealth, the size of your bank account. It doesn't depend on the power or what's written on your business card, as I like to put
mm,
it in modern terminology. Um, and so if I can just be a bit of that bridge, helping the world understand Africa and helping Africans understand how amazing and diverse and vibrant and needed they and their continent are, then I'll feel like I lived a good life.
Thank you for watching today's episode. This was an amazing episode with an incredible and knowledgeable guest, full of vibrance, full of resilience, and full of hunger to promote this beautiful continent. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please don't be scared to subscribe. Don't be shy. We don't bite. We want to hear from you. We want this conversation to carry on. Please subscribe to the Molo Molo African Tech Stories podcast, whether you're hearing this from the different audio platforms or you're watching this on YouTube. Please, let's carry on this conversation about promoting this beautiful continent. This is Molo Molo African Tech Stories, where we share the amazing stories of tech champions and innovators that are shaping Africa's future. I'm Dr. Pauline Kantwe. Until next time.